Hello everyone, quick intro here. I wanted to mention that the asset for this creature that you're going to see in this video can be found in this new Wonderland that I've published, as well as in the research center. As of you watching this video, it will very likely already be there, so you can download it to check it out. And with that out of the way, so today we're going to be talking about custom creations or complex creations, either name works. We're going to start right off the bat looking at the differences between the custom creations and the normal creations, and how you can use a specific trick to make creations that look normal look not so normal anymore. So let's just jump right into it. So the first difference that we're going to notice right away is that custom creations have an adjustment feature where we can make them 3 times as big as they normally would be, or as little as half the size that they should be. This is something that the regular creations don't have. That alone is already very useful because you could theoretically make smaller versions of bigger enemies as like easier versions to defeat. That's just not something that you can do with the regular creations. As far as the model, we have the same things here. They have the attachment points specific to each creation. Certain creations have attachment points in different locations or in different orientations. For example, here with the slime, we have its model origin, the root node, it's pointing forwards, which is standard. But if you look at the lava troll, both the stone hide and the ice hide lava troll, you're going to see that their root node is actually, the orientation is upwards. So you'll have to keep that in mind when you're using the same type of nodes for different types of units. Sometimes they might be on different orientations, so you have to keep that in mind. Everything else about these units is the same. The load optimizations, the sound effects. Where we're going to see more differences though is going to be in the combat tab. You're going to see here that the custom creation has a lot more tabs than the regular creation. For example, the basic attributes is the same. We have the same attributes here. We can edit the attribute growth curve. This is the same for this creature right here. You can preview the result values. You can also set it to custom, make your own curve with your own scalings for the stats. You can copy the list, export, import, so you can edit it in other software that you may have, and then import it right back. You can do all these things pretty easily if you do the exportation thing, or you can just change it manually, although I wouldn't recommend that because it's going to take a really long time to edit everything. Depending on your use case, it might be easier for you to just edit manually, but usually it's best to just export, edit in another software, and then import it right back. All these things are normal if you've already messed around with creations, be it they normal or custom. You would have already know all these things. Here we have the fixed attributes. The fixed attributes are the same as well between them. I've edited a little bit of mine because this creature was for a public asset that I'm going to publish on the asset library. So I've put everything to standard, the 10% that is standard across several different enemies in Genshin Impact. Then we have the aggro configuration is the same thing here. One thing to keep in mind is that for this creation specifically, I did change the aggro type to custom for certain nodes to work. Your game might not have it set to custom. If it doesn't, then some things about the creation will not work. It's just something to keep in mind if you're going to use the default or the custom aggro type. I've been using the custom and it's fine. But then we're going to start seeing the differences. When you go past the aggro configuration, you're going to see that the normal creation will just have standard settings, whereas the custom creation is going to have creation skill management right off the bat. Let's leave this one for a little bit later. Let's focus on the autonomous logic parameter settings for now, because when you compare the standard settings to the autonomous logic parameter, you're going to see that they're going to be about more or less the same things. So here we have the entering battle settings, the range detection. We can preview the range, the FOV as well. We can change the FOV, cone, full FOV. And then we also have the leaving battle settings and the territory settings. These work the same as they work for the basic creature, which is to say that when they're 25 meters away from their targets, they will start to leave the battle. You can preview that distance here. Whereas the territory is something that they spawn when they spawn right in, whether they're on the scene or you instantiate them manually through nodes. They're going to set up their territory, whatever it is that they spawn, and this territory will not move around with them, whereas the leaving battle settings will move around with them. Whenever their targets are beyond this distance, they're going to leave the battle. And this also happens if they cannot find a path to their target. The only other thing here is the chain engagement distance. This is effectively if multiple opponents will chain the engagement together, essentially get alerted by the same engagement. This is where you would set up the range in which that happens. In this case, if any hilichurls were to aggro towards me in this range, this creature would be alerted and would also chain the engagement and become aggroed towards me. This distance for custom creations comes at default at 0.01. This is usually because depending on your use case, you're not even going to need to have a chain engagement because maybe you're creating your custom creation as a boss. And usually a boss won't have a chain engagement because there will be just a boss and no one else. When you go to the regular creation and you go for its standard settings, you're going to see that it just has the standard behavior when not in battle, which is something that the custom creation also has, but we're going to see that when we go to the nodes. And then it has the combat. When you go to the combat, it's basically the exact same things. It's going to have the battle zone. It's also going to have the range detection, the FOV detection, leaving battle settings, the delay. All these things are the same as the custom creation. So now that we saw the standard settings, we're going to go back here to the skill management because it's somewhat similar, though not the same as this tab for the basic creations. If you have already messed around with basic creations, you will know that this is where you change whether they can use certain skills or not, their cooldowns as well, the initial cooldowns. For the custom creations, it's a similar process, but you're going to see that when it comes to the skills, we are the ones who have to set the skills up manually. So you can see here that we have two tabs, the skills and cooldowns. Skills is where you can create your skills. You can rename them. They are going to have an ID. This ID is very important. The name is good for you to be able to tell what the skill is at a glance. Because for example, when you go to the basic creation, for you to know what each of its abilities is, you would have to go to the website, the creation guide, and there you would be able to see what each of these skills does more or less. There's a description for each of them there. If you don't know what they do, then it's going to be very difficult for you to know if you want to have them be enabled or not, depending on your type of creation or the cooldown that you might want each skill to have. Whereas for the custom creation, you're the one who is going to set all of that up. So for example, my custom creation here has 5 skills. Each of them has its own name to tell me exactly what they do. This is ramming, this is projectiles, this is slam, this is ram and slam, and this is the teleport. And you're also going to see that I've actually changed how they work. They're not all the same in terms of their configurations. Here's where you would choose which of the skills that you've already created you're going to use. For you to know where you would create those things, it would be here at this new tab that was added with the creation custom skill. You can see that all of my skills are here, including the teleport. This is where you would create new skills for your creation. But going back to what we already have here, we have also set up their cooldown start points. So whether the cooldown starts when they enter battle or when they leave the battle, the initial cooldown. So for example, if this was 0, it would mean that immediately as soon as the creature begins combat, it would be able to immediately use this skill. Sometimes you might want to have that. Other times you might not want to have that. Depends on your use case. In my use case, I have all of these to have cooldown of 1 second so that the creation can at least have 1 second engaging the enemy in combat before it actually begins to use any skills. Then we have the default cooldown, which is just what it says it is. It is just the default cooldown that this skill will go through whenever it is used. You can set a variable time here, so you could set it to like 3 to 5 seconds, and then it would pick a random interval between 3 and 5, and it will be the cooldown for that instance of that skill. This can be good for adding variance to whatever creature you want to create. In my use case, I keep the cooldowns more or less the same because I want the cooldowns to be more defined and not as left up to chance as it would be, but you could easily have a little bit of variance here. And then we have the assigned cooldown group. This is where we have to go to this tab here, because this is where you will see that I've created a cooldown group called CD disengage. This is effectively a custom cooldown that I've created to be effectively a shorter cooldown than the global cooldown, which is something that we can also define here. And it's defined at 2 seconds. We can define it higher or lower depending on your use case. Here I have cooldown disengage at 1 second. You can add more cooldown groups if you want, or any other uses that you might have. And in my case here, what this basically does, everyone is off this cooldown disengage. And in the use case that I have here, whenever the skill teleport is triggered, which this skill is supposed to trigger whenever enemies are too close to my custom creation, when it triggers, it will trigger the cooldown of cooldown disengage, which means that after it teleports, it will have to wait for 1 second before it can use any of these other skills that are assigned a cooldown disengage, because otherwise it will follow the global cooldown, right? So if it uses any skill, it should go for a global cooldown first. So all of them will be at a 2-second cooldown. However, because I've set the teleport to not trigger the global cooldown, it will instead just trigger the cooldown disengage, which is just 1 second. So it's good to have that little pause after it teleports so that player can reorient themselves and they have 1 second to react to the fact that the creation has teleported, and then the creation will go on to use any other skill that it will be configured to do. Otherwise, the other ones all trigger the global skill cooldown, and you can also set your skills to ignore the global skill cooldown if you wanted to. And this is the main difference between custom creations and basic creations, is the fact that you have full control over this. There are no hard-coded behaviors on custom creations. So for example, if you ever messed around with the Fatui enemies, you would know that they have a hard-coded behavior to where they armor up, and you can't really disable that behavior here. You can see that they only have 4 skills. None of them is the skill where they become enhanced. Does that say ranged skill enhanced? Is just saying that this is the skill that they use when they're enhanced. Is not to say that they're enhancing themselves, which is a little confusing, but that's how it works. And you cannot disable that behavior, whereas the custom creation comes with no preset behavior. So for example, this Frostarm Lawatro right here, it will never actually armor up. It will always just stay the same. So effectively, the difference that you get from different custom creations comes down entirely to their animations, which is what you can use to make their skills. Now, as for the custom variables here, they work the same. They have the same custom variables. The common components tab here is the same. We can add attachment points as well if we need more attachment points or any other behaviors that we might want. Here, my custom creation has creation invisible and creation always animate. Those two things are crucial for it to work with the trick that I'm using here to effectively make this Lawatro right here look like this ball monstrosity creature thing. Is by making the Lawatro invisible, but you can't only make it invisible, you also have to tag it such that it always animates, because if you don't do this, the ball will not actually follow the enemy correctly. You can see here that it has a follow motion device, and I do have it set up here to where it will follow. There is a node graph that tells this ball to follow the Lawatro. We'll see that when we go to the node section, but that's effectively what this unit status is here for, the creature invisible and creature always animates. And you will know that this will still work even with the basic creation. If we were to just have it be invisible and always animate, this will be able to follow it, but there are certain things that we're going to do when it comes to the skill of the creation itself to where it will be able to line up a lot better. One of the difficulties that you may have had if you were creating through the basic creation, not through the custom creation, is that things would not be able to line up perfectly. So you would be able to make a ball and you would be able to make it follow more or less the animations of this guy, but it would be unable to actually control whether this ball animates, whether it rotates, whether it does different things depending on the actions of this enemy, because those things would not be synced up. And that was the major issue that we had before we had custom creations. So now that we do have the custom creations, we can set up the skills in such a way that they actually, in their animation timeline, they will actually tell our other objects, for example here, Legion projectile spin. If we go to the sandbox editor, you will see that Legion projectile spin actually sends a signal immediately as soon as it is called to the server node graph, and then there's a server node graph that does receive this projectile spin change follow device projectile. There is a node here that receives the signal and will do something related to that signal, which in this case is switching the follow motion device to the correct entity such that the visual effect of the enemy preparing the attack can be very visually be displayed to the player so that the player has an idea that this creation that looks like this and won't look like this is actually preparing an attack and is actually about to hit them. So that's the main big difference between the methods that we had before and the methods that we have now. Now, to finish things up here, you will see that the node section is also the same. We can just add node graphs here. There is no difference between the regular creation and a custom creation when it comes to nodes. The difference is that there are certain nodes that are obligatory for a creation to work. This is going to be the creation status decision node graph. This is also a node graph that we have to set up on the creation itself, but we have to set it up here because this is a local node graph. This is not a server node graph. So here you can see that we only have server node graphs, as indicated by this little symbol here, and we don't have local node graphs. Where we do set up the local node graph is here, the Legion custom decision graph. This is very important, and we're going to see here on the client node graph resource explorer, we're going to see that there's a bunch of tabs here. These all relate to the custom creations. And the one that we are looking at there is the custom decision node graph. You can treat this as effectively the AI of the enemy. It's going to have this execute only by sequence node. And this, it does exactly what it says. It will execute each of these only by sequence. And then it's going to switch itself to execution status by the sequence. And we can set up the condition for it to execute. This is a Boolean. It takes Boolean yes or no, and you can feed a Boolean output directly to it so that it swaps whenever this is true or not. This is checking whether the entity on the field is the aggro target. If the aggro target is on the field, it means that the creation is in combat, so it's going to swap to this status node graph configuration, which is the custom combat that I've created for this creation. Otherwise, it's going to swap to the custom roaming whenever this is not true. It will swap to the custom roaming, which is also something that I've created. So this is effectively trying to tell the creation whether it is in combat or not. It will always try to check if it is in combat first, because that is the most important one. And then it will try to check if it's not in combat, which should be true. If this is false, this should be true. Then at the very end here, we have a patrol setting that we can set up. We can set this up such that the creation can patrol a certain area. And this is going to be very specific in terms of usage, because if you're just looking to have a creation just exist and patrol by itself, this custom roaming thing that I've created here, it's already doing that through this tactic ground idle roaming. It effectively makes it such that the creation will just idle and will just roam randomly through a specific radius. You can set up the radius here, the minimal idle intervals, the maximum, the distances that it can roam, and there's also a tactical context. This tactical context is effectively something that you can, is just a string. You can write whatever it is that you want here. This is to make it easier for you to identify if you wanted to check which it was using on the previous frame. This is something that you can do for the custom creations, and tactical context would be passing exactly what you wrote here. If the tactic that was executed in the previous frame was this tactic, it will pass roaming in this tactical context, and you can use this to control exactly what is it that your custom creation was doing and what it should do in response. So for example, you could set this up to a multiple branches so that you know exactly, okay, if the last thing that it did was, for example, roaming, I wanted to do something else, or if it did this other thing, which is respawning, I wanted to do something else, and so on and so forth. You could use this tactical context for this. There's also the type here as well, which is the same thing. It passes the type instead of the context. So for example, if you have multiple of ground idle roaming and you just want to know whether it was roaming or not, here we're going to have the enumerations match. So you're going to see here all the tactics that it can perform. Either it was standing still, moving to the target, moving to the entity, rotating. There's many tactics that you can tell your creation to do. And by the way, for a list of all these tactics, you can easily find that on the general guide section of the Craftsperson Academy. And you can see here that we have the creation status node graphs, and we can query all of these things. They have the entire list here if you want to check it out. And this is very useful whenever you want to try to make your creation do a specific pattern or a specific behavior. You can check out here if the nodes exist for the creation to be able to achieve the behavior that you actually want. You can see that you can get the skill that is currently using. You can query for skill variables as well. You can get the lists, things that generally a lot of the nodes will always have these lists, get maximum, minimum, all these types of things. Ray filter is very important as well. So you can see that custom creations have a lot of options when it comes to what are they supposed to do. This looks like a lot. It looks very complex, very confusing. And to be honest, you can very easily make a very intricate and very elaborate custom creation, but you're going to see that this custom creation is not that difficult to create. And it already has a relatively complex behavior when it comes to being like an enemy, an additional enemy that you can spawn in your game. You can see here the other tactic is returning to the spawn point. This is very self-explanatory what it's supposed to do. If it leaves the battle, it should return to the spawning point, and this will only trigger at a certain distance. Force teleport trigger distance is 50, so when it reaches 50, it will forcibly teleport. Usually the way that this will work is if the enemy has been aggroed and you ran away from the enemy, it will, once it leaves battle, it will come to this execute by sequence as is indicated by this. Whenever there is no aggro target on the field, it will switch to this, and it will usually walk around a little bit for the idle roaming, and then it would immediately go for this tactic, return to spawn point. Usually it will be way above the idle roaming radius, so it will switch to the return to spawn point after leaving battle tactic, and then it will trigger after 2 seconds. So usually this will trigger immediately after it tries to do this and cannot actually roam because it's out of its radius. So it will fail the execution, come to this branch and teleport back. If it lost the aggro within this radius, then it will just go right back to idle roaming and won't actually teleport. You can also disable the HP recovery. This is something that you could do with the regular creations by using the HP cannot recover unit status. But here you can set it up immediately built into the tactic. So you can disable the HP recovery or you cannot disable. For now I have it not disabled because I want this to behave more or less like a regular enemy that could be encountered in game. So it will have the regular HP recovery that most Genshin enemies have. And you can also set up whether the skill can be interrupted or not. I have my idle roaming skill be interruptible, whereas my return to spawn point isn't, because as soon as this triggers, I want it to actually teleport the enemy to the spawn point. I don't want it to be able to be cancelled in this 2 seconds that it is returning to the spawn point. Whereas when it's idly roaming around, I want it to be able to be interrupted because I want it to be able to immediately switch to combat if it gains an aggro target. So as soon as it gains an aggro target, it will switch itself to this execution status. It will not linger in the ground roaming. It will not have to finish that instance of roaming before it can actually engage in combat. As for the patrol patch, you will see that the custom creation has the tactic execute patrol. So for example, if I didn't want it to follow a ground idle roaming, I would be able to use this execute patrol. And you will see here that it asks for a template ID. This template ID would be the template ID from the patrol setting here from the custom creation. So you can go edit details. It has the ID 1, and then you can set it up here, whether it's going to be a loop, a one-way or a round trip, where it's going to start. You can set up the path. You can edit the patrol path settings here. If you click this icon here, it will move you to the patrol that is currently set up, and you will see here that the patrol has these points that you can configure. This was just an example that I created of a patrol. It's just going around in this strange shape here, and you can see here that it has the reference. So this enemy that I've created has the reference as a prefab, and there's 2 instances of it in this current scene. So it has these 2 references here with the GUIDs, and whenever you want the creation to actually follow this path, you can call this tactic execute the patrol and pass the correct ID. And then you can also have all these other settings here, such as start from nearest, set endpoint at the spawn point, can pass the context as well, whether it can be interrupted, and all these things. And you could easily put this over this ground idle roaming to have it such that it, instead of doing the idle thing, you could just do a set path. It's gonna be useful depending on your use case for your creation, whether you want it to patrol a specific area of your map or if you just want it to be idle. It'll be up to you which of these tactics you're going to use. A lot of them are situational optional like that, to where certain creations might not use them, certain other creations will need them. This is the most basic setup for the custom decision node graph, which is the last node graph that we're going to look at for now in terms of the setup that you have in the editor itself. So now that we look at all of these things about the differences between the creations themselves, we can all start looking at how do we set up the skills themselves. As we're going to look at, for example, Legion Ramming, which is a skill, has a configuration ID, is a normal skill. Currently, the creations only have two different skills that it can use, either normal or instant. The differential here is that, for example, this instant skill here is not attributed to any model, whereas the normal skill has a model. So for example, if I were to create a new, let's say save and create a new file, you will see here that the primary model is already declared, is the Frostarm Lawatro. We cannot change this. And let's say we create the skill. But if I were to change the primary model, let's say to Blazing Axe Minotaur, the editor will immediately ask, confirm changing the creation to Blazing Axe Minotaur. And then it says it will clear the scene animation. And it really does mean that, because if you do this, you'll see that now we have the Minotaur model. And when we look at the animation editor, you see that we lost everything that we had there before. So what this means is that when you're creating skills, they are going to be exclusive to that model. So if you create for Blazing Axe Minotaur, you cannot create for the Frostarm and the Wooden and all these things. They're all going to be exclusive to one another. Whereas the instant skills don't have that. The instant skills are just there. They don't have any animations. They work exactly like character instant skills in that there is no event track. You can just put events that will happen when the skill is supposed to fire, and that's about it. You can put multiple events here if you want, but that's all that you can do. You cannot actually edit the timeline of the skill itself. So now let's go to the timeline of a normal skill. The normal skill will have the animations that you're setting up. You can put multiple animations if you want. For example, you can just put one extra animation. It's going to play here, the melee attack. And then you can set up your other events. Here for my use case, I'm using only one animation and it's enough. And it's the charging animation. And you will see here that there is a animation timeline that is very similar to character skills. And that is because it works more or less the same as character skills. You have the status tracks and you have the node graph events. You can set up your node graph events by just adding your node graphs. You can create new tracks here. Either create a node graph or a status graph. And then once you have your tracks, you can just add events. For example, here we have all of these node graph events that we can set up here. And we have the status node graph where we can add events. And you can see here that the events for the status are just the VFX plane that we can add or set the creation orientation. The set creation orientation is going to be whether it's going to look at the aggro target or to a coordinate variable. You can pass the name of the coordinate variable that you want it to look at, and it will read the custom variables from the creation. So if you wanted it to look at a specific location before it casts a skill, you can pass the location here and it will look. It has the rotation as well, the angular velocity that it will rotate towards this coordinate. And this is very useful depending on your use case. Here I have it set up to where it will look at the aggro target because this is a dashing skill. You will see here that it also has this setting right here where it can automatically face its target. So you can either do it here to where it will do this throughout the entire skill, or you can set it up to only take effect in a certain location of the animation timeline. And you can also set it up such that it can interrupt other skills, whether it will continue casting after defeating the target, if it can be cast while it's reachable, while it is unreachable. All these things will depend on whether you want your creation to cast, for example, this ramming skill as a gap closer, so if it can cast while it is unreachable, or if it will only cast when the enemy is within reach to be able to be cast. And then in the animation itself, you will see that it is very simple. It only has a couple of nodes. The main ones here that we have are the charge VFX, the spin, and the attack. Now, this is something that I'm going to have to explain because it is exclusive to this setup of custom creation itself. One of them is RAM charge VFX. Now, if you saw earlier, you realized that we had the option to just place the VFX right here, right? And this is true that this would work on basically any other situation, but because of the setup that we have going on here to where our creation is invisible, what ends up happening is that when you set up VFX directly on the timeline like this, they will work as far as the visuals go, but when it comes to their audio effects that you may have set up, they will not trigger, even though they are here. And if you play them in the editor, you will see that it does play. And that part is fine, but the part that we have to work around is the fact that the audio will not actually play. So we're going to take a look at why that is. But before we do that, I have to present this new feature that helps a lot with all these things related to skills, which is the VFX tools. You saw that I just placed one of these there. This is a VFX tool. And effectively what this is it allows us to create entirely new VFX and have them be bundled together and considered as a singular VFX. So for example, if we look here, we have this effect here. You can have other effects play out as well. And you will see here that we have the timeline. We can edit exactly when they play. And we can do this to create entirely new VFXs, and we can put them directly on the timeline of your skills, and they will play exactly how you set them up to play. And you can also change other things such as the playback speed, you can change the zoom, all these things. And the thing that is pertaining to us here on this current topic is the fact that they have behavior on destruction, and we have these settings here. So for example, we can just stop the particle emission, and there's also behavior when hidden. The behavior when hidden is the thing that is missing, because for example here we have destroy effect or none. If we set it to none, it means that with our hidden creation it will still play these VFX. But if we come over here and we create another and add a sound effect, you will see that the sound effect configuration doesn't actually have those settings. It doesn't really have a setting for whether the creation is hidden or not. So when the creation is hidden, it will simply not play. It will play like one frame of that supposed VFX, and then the rest of it will not play. Now, don't get me wrong, like the VFX tools are extremely useful. They are extremely powerful. You can see that I'm still using a lot of them, even though we have this anti-synergy between the custom creation being invisible and the VFX tool, but you can still create them and you can still instance them through node graphs. And that's like the big deal about these, is the fact that they're not confined just to the skill animation itself. We can set them up either via the status track itself, or we can set it up via node. And there's another thing that is very useful about these, is that if you paid close attention, you will notice that here we have looping effects or VFX tools. We don't have the option of putting timed effects on the timeline directly, but with the new VFX tool feature, we absolutely can, because the VFX tool, how it works is when you create it, it will ask if you want it to be timed or persistent. You can see here that I have a bunch of timed VFX tools, and they all have timed effects, but I also have this one as an example, persistent VFX tool, which means looping as well. It's considered as a looping VFX, but you're going to see that it only has timed effects. So effectively what the VFX tool allows us to do is pass timed VFX to our timeline as if they were looping VFX. So you can see here the VFX tool, it only has timed VFX. It doesn't have any looping VFX, but it can still be passed here, because it is a persistent or looping VFX tool in terms of its configuration. And that is a huge game changer. This used to be one of the limitations of skills that we can just completely bypass now, and that's very good. And not only that, it also allows us to use sound effects a lot more easily, because otherwise we would have to also sync up the sound effects and the sound effect players through Node, which was a convoluted process. Now we don't even need to do that. We can just drop the sound effects here and they will play exactly when we want it to, exactly how we set up here in the animation timeline. So we have all of these, which are also for the custom creation. We have them set up with names, and here's an example of the timeline being very useful, because you can set up very complex animations by just having them follow the timeline. So for example here, we have this death animation with a bunch of explosions. We've set them up here. They all explode at their respective times, which is something that if we were to use just raw VFX for, it would take a lot of time, and we would be unable to use it in the timeline of the animation itself, because they're all timed VFX. So we would not be allowed to use them. We would only be allowed to use looping VFX. Now, with all that out of the way, we can start looking at some of our creation node graphs. For example, the node graph here where it says spin and the node graph here where it says attack. If we go to the Miliastra sandbox, we will see that these are all skew node graphs. We have ram spin right here and we have ram attack right over here. So what ram spin does is it sends a signal to the server node graph. And here we have a comment. This is something that you should absolutely do for every single one of your nodes, at least one comment that says what this node is supposed to do, at the very least this one sequence. Here we have it sends signal to change the ball following device to appropriate spinning tool. And here we just have it to send a signal to spawn the ramming hitbox that follows the creation. So let's focus on the initial one first, change of following device. The node that actually receives that signal is the follow device handler. As like I said, we have all of these devices that are supposed to follow our entity. So for example, here we have the monitor signal. It's monitoring the ramming. If we go over here, change the follow device ramming, it is listening to this signal. And we do the check here to see whether the signal source is ourselves. And if it is, we're going to switch the follow motion device and start the timer to switch it back. And you can see here that the comment says exactly that. Briefly change the follow device of ball to spinning tool when creation uses the respective skill, and then set up the timer for changing the follow device back. Now this is where the fact of this being a custom creation and how it works by it being invisible is actually starting to come together as this one singular thing, because when this creation is created, for context, this Legion follow device handler here is set up on our complex creation. So we have here follow device handler. What it does is when the entity is created, we're going to create all of these prefabs, which are all of these objects that we use to effectively animate our ball over here, this ball thing. We animate it through all of these devices that we create. And you can see here that it creates the spinning tool for ramming, and it creates the ball itself, the body. It creates the spin flower, and it creates the horizontal fast spin tool for slamming. Now, a lot of that sounded like a mouthful, but if you've been messing around with follow devices, a lot of this will be pretty normal stuff for you, because what those are referring to are effectively these two little things here. As you can see, this ball is not the only thing that is following our custom creation. We also have the classic spinning tools here. We have the spin flower and we have the spin tool that spins a little bit faster than the flower. And what these do is they effectively bypass the limitation of the follow motion device. If we were to try to add any motion device really to this, such as basic motion device, you will see that the game flashes a warning there, cannot add mutually exclusive with the follow motion device. So basically, Miliastra has this limitation to where you can only have one type of motion device per entity. So here, if we have the follow, we can't add the basic, and that is problematic with the ball because it means that the ball can only follow and it can not do any other animation, and that would be a little bit too bland. It would be a little bit too predictable, and it wouldn't really inform players very well of what the ball is doing at any given time. So what we did here is we created all of these other objects, and what these do is they simply spin by default. You can see here the preset status. They have different preset status of 0 or 1. 0, it is going to take a while, but eventually it just stops, and this means that it's not spinning, it's not doing anything interesting. Whereas if we set it to 1, suddenly you will see that it will start actually spinning. And if we look at the attachment points, the center origin here is just the same. We set the rotation to 0 here real quick. You see that it's the same, it's pointing forwards. But if you look at the flower subnodes here, you will see that they are actually in fact spinning. And this is how we bypass the limitation of only having one type of motion device. And it's basically the exact same thing for this thing. It has the preset statuses as well, the center origin, the follow, the subnode. So everything is set up exactly the way that we want in terms of them being able to give the idea that this ball is not only following our creation, but also moving depending on what the creation is doing. So spinning in different speeds as well, different angles, as we're going to see in a little bit. And you're going to see that these all have the visibility. They're set to no visibility. This is also something that the creations do not have, be them custom creations or basic creations. You don't have the visibility option here. You have to give them the status effect, the unit status, for it to become invisible. So that's why we have to do all of these workarounds, all these things, in order to have a body that actually makes sense and animates alongside the custom creation. So once it creates these prefabs, it will set their faction. These are optional nodes. These, ideally, you would not be using these. These are here because I'm creating this asset for the asset library. So I want this asset to be usable right out of the gate for as many people as possible. So we have here that it sets the faction to be the same as owner, but these are optional because you could have spin tool faction or decoration faction to bypass this. This is because ideally you want these to not be hostile towards the creation. You don't want them to be hostile towards the players as well, because you don't want the player to accidentally target these. You want the player to target the creation. Especially this is a problem in classic mode, although this isn't a classic asset. It still has to keep that in mind. Although because I'm doing this and factions are not something that I can easily import to other players through the asset, I'm simply making them the creation faction. And in the asset itself, there will be a video that tells people how they're supposed to set up this creation, and it will say that these are option nodes, that you can just delete them if you do not need them to be of this faction. You can just have them be of a different faction that is friendly towards all other factions. You can see you can just change or create a new one and make that the decoration faction, or however you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, these are all just decorations, right? The player is not fighting the flower, is not fighting this, is not even fighting the ball. It is fighting the complex creation, but we want the player to believe that they're fighting the ball. That's why the creation is invisible and the ball is doing all of those rotational oriented things and animating and having VFXs, sound effects, all these things. We have it also set up here that it cannot be targeted, although ideally it would just be a different faction where it would just be friendly towards players. That is the ideal setup here. And they all have the follow motion device, of course, to follow the creation as well as the ball, because when they're all following the creation in tandem, for example, with the ball, as we're going to see here, when the creation receives the signal to change the follow device, it will get the current ball, which is the custom variable that we set up here using the pins themselves that give us the created entity. We already set them up to be all of those variables, and then we just switch the follow motion device to the correct entity right here on the creation. And then here is where we actually switch the follow motion device to follow the correct spinning tool to give the idea that the creation is actually spinning. The ball itself is actually spinning and in response to the signal. So it's not just randomly spinning or just randomly spawning bullets. Everything is synced up through the usage of signals, follow motion devices, all of those things. They come together to create this idea that the player is fighting the ball and not something else. We have when timer is triggered, the multiple branches to check for the timer name, and whenever it actually matches, it will just switch the follow motion device of the ball to the creation itself for it to continue acting as if it were just a ball. Also, another thing to keep in mind here is when we declare the follow motion devices, you see that there's 3 follow motion devices, but only 2 prefabs. This is because I've used the rotation offset to create 2 entities that are the same prefab, but they're doing 2 different things, because this one is offset in 180 degrees, this one is offset by 90. And what this means is that they effectively just have the ball rotate in different axes whenever it's set to follow this target. So we don't need to have one prefab for each direction that we want the ball to rotate in. You can just have the one and have it have a rotation offset, and this works out just fine. Now, another thing, if you've been paying attention, is that there are a lot of prefabs here. We have the prefab that is instantiated when the Legion is ramming. We have the spin tool, we have a projectile, we have the other spin tool, and the body. Now, this is 5 plus the creation itself. This is 6 prefabs. And this might sound quite costly, 6 prefabs for a singular enemy. And if you've watched my previous video, I've talked about how you should be mindful of how many prefab slots you're using in your games, because you might come to the point where you might not have enough. But they've since actually increased the amount of prefabs that you can have from 300 to up to 1,000, which is over triple the amount. So now I'm a lot more advocative of you being able to use things such as has these spinning tools, because since none of the configuration is on them, it's not them who rotate around the enemy or the ally, it's actually just they're being instantiated and told to follow the thing that instantiated them. So this can be used even for your player, so long as you remember to switch the faction, or if you have a neutral faction, like a friendly faction that is friendly to everyone, decoration faction, you can easily use the spin tools in whatever orientation that you want for whatever use case that you want. You don't really have to use multiples of these prefabs. Now the other prefabs less so, like the ramming, the projectile, you can easily also turn these into neutral prefabs, although it would take a little bit more effort. And the ball, of course, the ball has to be of this enemy, right? Like there is no way to make the ball a player friendly, although you could easily spawn this creation as a friendly unit if you wanted to have variations in that regard. The creation does work against other creations as well. So in that sense, while this sounds costly to use 6 prefabs to have a completely different type of enemy, is actually a lot more worth it now than it was before. You will see that the other attacks actually repeat this structure of monitoring a signal and then doing things to switch the follow motion device. That is the remainder of this node graph. And another thing to keep in mind is that I've set these up as custom variables. The reason for this is actually specified here on this comment. It stores all spin-in declarative entities and variables for deletion via snapshot once the creation dies. This is very important because effectively what this is doing is it's setting up the variables to have the contents of the created entities, because when this creation dies, what is going to happen is we have the entity destroy handler node graph here. This is going on the stage entity itself. This is a very classic setup for Miliastra when it comes to identifying whether creations were destroyed or not. We have the entities destroyed here. This is the standard node for destruction checks. The most important pin here is the custom variable component snapshot, because this is where we're going to check whether the destroyed entity was actually the custom entity. So we have here the is legion boolean being passed, and if it is, we're going to play the def animation. And here is where it gets a little bit confusing, because we're not playing the def animation on the creation itself, because that is not possible, or on the location. We are actually querying the ball itself that we stored in the entity via creation here, that we instantiated the body and we immediately stored it in a variable. We are using this variable that we set up here to effectively get the ball once the creation is destroyed and actually play the animation on the ball. And then we're also inheriting all the values that we had before. The ball inherits all visual entities summoned by the custom creation via variable snapshot for later deletion. So the ball itself is actually what is going to be in charge of deleting the other aspects, the other tools that we use to animate this custom creature. So we have here the spin tool, the spin horizontal, and then we start the timer for deletion. This is the timer that we will have to where it will be playing the animations. And then it will also close all the sound effects that the ball has by default. If you go over here, we're going to see the ball has this SFX player. These are just the idle things that it plays while the ball is around. It will then close all these specified sound effects players of the ball, so that the def animation can play without being interrupted by all of these, and the player can listen and it can stop playing these effects, so the player knows that the entity actually died. And the inheritance here, we're just going to delete all of these once the timer is up. Now we're going to look here, the ball node, it only has a timer is triggered because it already has the timer put on the ball by the stage entity. So we don't need to query whether the entity is on the field or anything of that sort. The timer is already here, and we already have the event node already prepped to see if the timer is that name that we passed here on the entity destroy handler, legion deletion delay. And if it is, then we're just going to remove all of those entities that we inherited before the ball destroys itself effectively. So once the creation was defeated, we stored all of the custom variables on the ball itself, and then the ball itself will then remove all those entities once we played the animation and the ball is already ready for deletion. So it deletes all of these entities and it then deletes itself, and that's how the ball itself ends up deleted at the end of everything that we've set up here. And that is why all of these variables here, the spin tools, the ball, etc., they're all custom variables for this specific purpose. Now for the attacks, We have two different types of attacks. After we covered the spin, that was a lengthy segment, but now we can finally cover the attacks. The attack is the same, it just sends a signal, and the signal is going to be sent to a different node this time. This node is going to be the server hitbox handler. The signal is right here, spawns ramming, and it checks for the creation skill signal to spawn server-side ramming hitbox that follows the creation. Now, technically, this would have been possible to create via local projectile. We could have created a local projectile, and we could have passed the tracking target for this. We could have created a tracking projectile, and we could have had the tracking be passed upon the projectile being created. We could have a fixed point projectile launch, and we could have track target equals self. This way the projectile would track the enemy itself. We could have it also inherit the faction of the enemy, and the create location could be the location of the enemy as well, and pass the projectile prefab and then set it up here. Set it up such that it has initial speed, acceleration, all these things, tracking. We could have set everything there, and this could work as a ramming animation, as like a dash, and we could have here non-repeating trigger, all these things. We could have had everything here, but I've chosen to set it up on server side because in general, being on server side, while it does introduce certain inconsistencies in terms of the on-hit detection, because the detection has to go through the server in order to reach the player because it is a server-side projectile. The local projectiles don't have this issue. They are a lot more accurate in terms of connection, in terms of on-hit detection. But the reason why I've chosen to have it be set up via servers anyways is because there are certain things that you can do with server-side projectiles that you cannot do with local projectiles. It does have a node graph. Now, this node graph is also, it's very simple. It's just doing the ramming detection. And one thing that is doing that, while it would be possible on a regular local projectile, it would be more difficult to do. So I've decided to do it here via server projectile, is it actually has some exclusive node related behavior that allows it to check for certain things that we would not be able to check via local node graph. The big thing that we're checking here is actually a unit status, because for this attack in particular, I wanted the ramming hitbox to be a continuous hitbox. You're going to see here that it has the on-hit detection be a repeating trigger with an interval of 0.5. So I wanted it to be able to hit multiple times, but usually when it comes to multi-hit attacks in Genshin Impact, they have this feature to where whenever one attack hits, the next attack of that same instance is going to do reduced damage. This is something that you can see if you fought against a rune guard. You've absolutely must have ran into this in effect, because whenever they use their missile attack, you will see that the damage of the first missile is a lot higher than the damage of any other of those missiles, and that is because they have something that I like to refer as multi-hit protection. And the way to make that work would be the damage of the attacks is going to be diminished over every hit, so that the player actually has a very likely possibility of actually dashing out of these attacks and being able to regain control of their character before they die. This is something that I use the server projectile for, because there's a big difference here. You can see here that in my logic, I have this query unit ID stacks by slot ID. So what we're doing here is we're adding a unit status to the player whenever the player themselves is hit, because while I could do this very easily by simply adding a manual count to the main creation themselves, what we did instead is we added a tag to our attacks. So here we have attack tag list, we have multi-hit. If it is a multi-hit attack, we are going to add this unit status to the target that was hit. And this unit status doesn't do anything at all. We have multi-hit protection. We have here that it has 5 layers. It is not infinite duration, it only lasts a certain amount. But you're going to see here that it has no effect. It literally only exists here as a way for us to know how many hits have hit the enemy so far. And then we also have to carry along the slot ID, because the slot ID is actually required for us to check whenever we use other attacks that are going to do multi-hit damage. We have to know the multi-hit slot ID in order to know how many stacks that unit status actually has on the entity that was hit. So here you're going to see that we query the unit status tagged by slot ID, and then we have the configuration ID is the same configuration ID here, is right here, and then we have slot ID. So for slot ID, we do have to get the multi-hit slot ID, which is a custom variable. We grab the custom variable from the owner, and then the owner of the entity, which is ourselves. This is the bullet that we create. It has the owner, so we grab the custom variable from the owner. And then we have the stacks. The stacks are going to be inputted in as an integer. We're going to data conversion type that to float, because then we're going to add 1 to that and then divide it by this would be the actual motion value of the attack. So every time the ramming attack hits, it will count the number of stacks, and then it will get the motion value of the ram and then divide it by the number of stacks plus 1. Now here, the way that it does track the attack of the enemy is through the initiator pin. This will mean that we can drag the owner entity in here and it will count this attack as if it is being done by the main creation itself. So this when attack hits will actually proc, and it will actually add the unit status whenever this happens, because the initiator is indeed the main unit, the custom creation. And then we have the ability unit here that we're using for this attack. Target entity is going to be whoever triggered the on-hit hurtbox condition for the on-hit detection component. So this is all to just make a attack node to where the damage actually just depends on a variable. Now, if I were to do this via local node graph, you can see here that instead of the query unit status tagged by slot ID or on the skill itself is whether the entity has the specified unit status. Now, technically, this could also suffice. You don't necessarily need to have your entity, your custom creation actually deal dynamic damage depending on the stun lock count. Or even if you did that, you could also query how many times the entity has hit in that short frame and have that be a different variable instead. I used to have a variable that checked exactly for that, but then I decided instead of trying to mess around with that, I would just do it via server node graph, because that way I can dynamically query how many stacks I have, how many times the enemy was hit, so that I can reduce the damage of the attack according to how many times that enemy has been hit. If a different enemy gets hit, it will have a different number of stacks, so it will actually apply a different amount of damage to that enemy, instead of the situation where if the stacks were on the creation itself and we try to pass that via local node graph, we would have the creation doing reduced damage even to someone who hasn't been hit by that multi-hit. Now, this is all optional in a sense, because you don't exactly need your creation to actually follow this specific rule, but it's something that I wanted for my entity. I wanted it to be able to tone down on the damage in case it actually got a multi-hit attack off. It also helps because if the enemy was able to dodge all but one bullet, if I were to make all bullets deal damage that made sense for them all hitting and only one of them hits, suddenly that attack is not going to be very powerful. If I were to make it such that one hit was powerful enough to be damaging, then suddenly someone who gets hit by all 5 will probably just immediately drop dead. So this is a way to effectively find a middle ground to where a singular bullet will deal a lot of damage, but repeated bullets will deal significantly less damage over that duration, over that instance of the attack, such that the player doesn't get completely destroyed if they just fail to dodge a single attack. We will see this also happen with the projectiles. The projectile attack is effectively the exact same thing as the ramming attack. We're going to see here that it spawns projectiles and it also spawns them based on a timer. This is because I wanted the projectiles to spawn in a particular formation depending on how many loops the timer has gone through, and after the timer reaches enough loops, it will then stop the attack. So here, after 5 current repetition, when the repetition reaches 5, we're going to stop this create projectile thing via stopping the timer and resetting the repetitions, such that whenever we send more bullets, we're going to start from 0 again. So they're going to start from where they began in terms of their orientation. Here you can see the 3D vector. We have it to where the rotation is actually a new new 3D vector that we created based on the repetition, the number of loops that the timer has gone through a calculation right here. And the projectile itself will also get the aggro target of the entity, and this is what it will track. It will simply track the aggro target upon being created. And this is how the projectile looks. It is of the creation faction. It also cannot be targeted, cannot be affected. It has the unit status. Remember when we did the initiate attack node, we actually set that up to have this ability unit ram attack. We have the same thing here, ram attack, projectile hit. This is also something that is on the node itself of the projectile hit detection. Everything works more or less the same, except this one also has effects when it hits the scene. So whenever it triggers, if it wasn't a hurt box, it effectively means that it was the scene. So whenever it is the scene, it's going to just play the timed effects. It is not actually going to initiate any attacks, and then it's going to delete immediately afterwards. And then we can take a look at the ability unit. But before we do that, I would actually like to pull up the slam attack node, because this one actually does use a local hitbox. This one is not based on the server at all. And this has the local hitbox of the slam attack, and the damage coefficient, we alter that to alter the damage. This is a damage coefficient of 1. This sounds low, but when you look at the base attack of this creation, it actually scales a lot. If you look at the curve, let's see here, the preview, the results levels. So like a level 1, this is only 300 attack, which is very weak. 300 attack, if we get 100% of this, is only 300.4 damage, and usually this damage is going to be cut in half when it comes to damage to players because of their defense. So we're going to have very little damage here from the creation, but as we go along, you're going to see that this number goes way up there. So here at level 60, it is already at 9,207 attack. This is a massive number. This is a huge attack stat when it comes to comparing it with what it had at level 1. It only had 300, so this is a 30 times increase in terms of its attack. So an attack that is doing 100% of that amount is actually doing 9,000 damage to a player, although this is going to be reduced by around half because of the defense, the level scaling, all these things. So the slam is actually doing around 4,500 damage, which is around the damage that a big attack in Genshin Impact usually does, depending on the enemy that you're fighting. If it's a very strong enemy, it might actually do this 9,000 damage, but that's usually something that a level 90 enemy would be doing to you. If we go to the scaling of level 90, you can see that we're jumped to 2200 attack, which is just absurd. If you do this 100%, this is like 1100 damage in terms of when comparing to the allied defense. So yeah, the damage numbers go way up there. You can obviously reduce the base attack. If you reduce the base attack, you will reduce the damage as well, but you can also reduce the damage with the damage coefficient. Now I wanted to show these two at the same time because you're going to see that they're very similar. All these like trigger spherical hitbox, you can see that there's a lot of other hitbox nodes. They all function more or less the same. I can pick a random one here, like trigger hitbox, a specific attachment point. You can see they all have a faction filter, the location, the attachment point here in this case, offsets, damage coefficient, all these things, they're all here. And these nodes look scary, but they're very simple to effectively make work. You can take a look here at the ability unit that we have set up here. This is a ram attack. It is a direct attack. If we were to create a different one, you can see here a hitbox attack. We can choose the hitbox type, we can choose the location, and you're already starting to see how these are all very similar, where we can choose the location, we can choose the rotation, we can choose the exact zoom of this hitbox, whereas here we have a couple of preset shapes. You can see here that we have rectangular, we have sector, we have spherical, so you can see that they're similar in that regard. And then we have damage coefficient, damage increment, elemental type, elemental attack potency. An elemental attack potency of 25 is around 1 gauge unit. If you know about the gauge unit theories and things like that, you will know how much 1 unit represents more or less. And knowing that 25 is 1 unit, you will also know that 50 is around 2 units and so forth. Usually you don't really need to know much about these things to configure your custom creation. You can just use 25. This is a safe amount because this is 1 gauge unit of application, and this is more or less the standard amount that most things will have. And then we have the hit type and attack types. You can see here that we also have hit type, melee attack. We have here the elemental attack attack potency, the type, we have the tag here. If we wanted this to be a multi-hit attack, this isn't a multi-hit attack, but if we wanted it to be affected by the multi-hit, where it would at least apply the multi-hit, we would put an attack tag here, and it would retroactively apply in our other node. But here we don't need the attack tag, we don't need any tags at all for this attack. You're going to see here that we do have an attack tag, but it's on a different location here. It's at the very end. We can set up the multi-hit tag here. Then you're going to see that we have filters. We have the trigger type, if it only triggers once per entity, or if it triggers multiple times. Here, this would be set up in the on-hit detection unit. So here we will have repeating trigger, repeating trigger intervals. This is effectively what this is. Although here we don't have the option to repeatedly trigger this hitbox. We would have to have multiple of this event happening multiple times to trigger it multiple times. And then we have on-hit scene effects. This doesn't even need to be filled up. This is just on-hit performance. Then we have, because this is a direct attack, it doesn't have that option there, but we have it here. If we just create an ability unit that is just a hitbox, it does have the on-hit scene effects as well, which is the same as this. The radius, the attack layer filter, so whether we want it to hit only the scene, only the hurt boxes, or hit all. Hit type, one of the ways that I've used to understand more or less what this is supposed to be is I've actually used exactly this part of the ability unit to understand more or less what numbers make sense there. If you go over here, hit reaction, if you add something like combo hit, you will see that immediately all of these are going to be filled up, kind of like a preset. So you can see that for a combo hit, you want to have light hit for the hit level, and you want to have horizontal impulse of 200, vertical impulse of 0. Because of the way that hits and like poise and resistance to interruption works, you're going to need the interrupt value to actually exceed the value of interrupt intake that the entity that was hit has. So for an example, we can check our custom class here. You're going to see that we have an interrupt threshold of 100. So if an attack does more than 100, so long as we don't have any interruption resistance, we are going to be staggered by that attack, and we're going to do whatever it is that that hit tells us to do. So for example, in this hit, we're going to get combo hit. So we're going to just have a light hit reaction to the hit, and we're going to have a little bit of a horizontal impulse. And here is where we set up the knockback orientation. Usually we're going to want a line connecting the attacker and the hit point, or we can also set it up to where it makes a line connecting the owner. There's a lot of options here. Some of them are actually squished. It has been a while since I actually opened this menu, and this is a little bit funny that some of them are actually squished, but we have a bunch of them here. We have attackers facing orientation as well, and you're going to see that these options are also here. Line connecting the attacker and hit point, hitbox on hit, line connecting attacker's owner and hit point, tangent, opposite, all these things we have here, we can change them. And then we can block the damage pop-up depending on what we want. We have the on-hit special effects. These are the on-hit special effects when that attack hits anything. So if we want different hits to happen on the on-hit, we're going to have this. And here is the same thing. We can set it up. I have here on-hit electro blunt because this is a smash attack. Smash attack, if you know in Genshin terms, it effectively means something like a claymore or an explosion attack. These are all smash attacks. It means that they can trigger shatter when they're used against frozen targets. And melee attack is effectively for certain AI behaviors. For example, if you set your attack to be ranged attack, it's possible that something like the Magu Kinki might block it if you do it from afar, because that's usually how his AI works. He blocks ranged attacks, but he does not block melee attacks. And then we have the interrupt value here, which is the same interrupt value that we have over here. If it is true damage, if there is damage variation, all these things. And then we have the special effects for on hit. We have aggro multiplier. And here we have the hit level. This is the same thing as what we configure here. So you're going to see, if I say this is a strong impact, you're going to see that all of these options are going to change. So for example, this has launch 480, 600, and here we have launch 480, 600. So you can use these setups here that exist on the ability unit to have an idea of what you're supposed to fill up in your hitbox types of nodes. So they're not really that scary. As long as you've filled up at least the things that are here in the ability unit, you will have an attack that actually works. And you don't even need to fill up all of the information either. You can leave some of the information blank and it will still work. It will still do exactly what it wanted to. So now that we covered all the basics of how creation skills work and how you can edit them and how you can effectively sync up your creation animations with your decoration animations via the spinning tools and signals, we can now look at the remainder of the custom creation and how it works. Because for now, we've only seen the skills and we've only seen certain nodes as to how it actually casts those skills. This is through the custom decision node graph. I've previously mentioned that it does this where it checks whether it has an aggro target or not, and it does either the combat or the roaming. We've checked out the roaming so far, but now we can check out the combat. This is another thing that you may be able to set up differently for your creation, because for example, in my case, I only have 2, but there's also a situation to where you might want to make multiple execution statuses here and decide which one is going to be active here on this execute only by sequence, and effectively have your creation have its decision making only be affected by this custom decision node graph. And that makes a lot of sense for a lot of things. In particular, it might make more sense to you in terms of understanding how your creation works if you have all of the hierarchy here in this specific custom decision node graph. In my use case, I found that I understood it more easily if I made everything a singular combat state, to where while it is in the combat state, it will decide which ability it's going to use based on a bunch of parameters here that we set up. So for example, we have the execute only by sequence here as well. So it will always try to execute 1. If it cannot execute 1, only then will it actually try to execute 2, and so on and so forth. So here we have checking the distance, whether the distance from self to target is more than 8. If it is, we're going to execute certain skills here. Now, right out of the bat, you're going to see that we have this node. Like I said, we have a lot of different nodes that your creation can use. If you wanted to check all of the nodes, you can go to the Craftsperson Academy. On the general guide, you can see that there's a lot of nodes that your creation can get, both for your skill node graph as well as your status node graph. There are the status node graphs here. You can check the pathfinding ability, the coordinates when it enters battle, that one node that we used for the status decision, vertical angle as well, vertical distance, the distance in general. So you can check a lot of things for your creation here, but in my use case, I kept this simple. I just checked the distance. If the distance is greater than 8, we're going to do certain skills. If it's not, we're going to carry on to do some other things. So here is one of the things that I've used, and one of the things that made it make more sense for me to put everything on the same node graph is the fact that I wanted to have some sort of randomness to my creation when it comes to using its skills. I've added that randomness through this check here. We're just going to check whether 1 equals 1 or equals 2 via this random number. This is an integer. And if it does, we're going to execute a certain skill. If it doesn't, we're going to execute a different skill. We're going to see that we also connected something to the failed execution pin, which means that if for some reason the creation cannot execute this skill, is just going to execute the other skill that we had set up prior. So why is that? The reason for this is because I want my creation to have a little bit of randomness whenever it actually fulfills the requirements for the specific skill that I wanted to cast. So here when it says skill ID 1, it refers to your custom creation. When you go to its settings on the creation skill management, we have set these up and you saw that they had IDs. This is effectively what it's referring to. So ID number 1 is ramming, ID number 4 is ram and slam. I wanted the creation to be able to use either or whenever they were off cooldown, and that's another thing that influences this. If this skill is not off cooldown, it will fall into the failed execution. It will fail because it was on cooldown, and then it will try to execute the next thing. So here, if this skill is on cooldown, it's going to just execute this one anyways. But if on the randomness aspect of this instance, if it rolls a different skill, so for example skill number 4, it will then, if skill number 4 is on cooldown, it will just execute skill number 1, and then it will move on. If the distance from self to target is not greater than 8, it will try to check whether the distance is greater than 4. This is to know if the creation is only at a mid-range from the opponent, or if the creation is at point blank or very close to. If the creation is this between 4 and 8 meters of distance, it will execute skill number 2. The skill number 2 in this case is the projectiles. Here for the projectiles, I didn't have any variations. You could have other variations and you could add either randomness or just immediately connect here. If this is on cooldown, then immediately go into your new variation for this specific range. And if not, it means that it is point blank. And here we have a repetition of the exact same thing that we had here, where it will try to cast either slam or teleport. And when either of these are on cooldown, so they fail, we are going to cast the other one. The slam is very simple, it's just a slam. And the teleport is our instant skill, which doesn't have anything. All it has is Legion teleports. Here would be the perfect location for me to speak on why we have this many events happening here. The only event that does the attack is this one, Legion attack, and this one is the spin to make the ball spin in the correct direction. These ones are called Legion Slam Course Correct. Now, what is that? What does that do? Legion Slam Course Correct is using another node graph that is extremely useful. This is called Complex Creation Directed Movement. This does exactly what it says. It directs the movement of the complex creation. Here we have a target location that is a custom variable on the entity itself called the slam location, and it has a displacement duration and it has a max distance, whether it ignores collision or not. So what this does, we have a comment here that says continuously moves creation to the slam location position to counteract the natural movement of the lower true slam skill animation. So what does this mean is that indeed when the lower true is doing this, even though here on the preview we are seeing that it is not moving at all, it's staying relatively in the same place other than, you know, the jump. It does the jump, but it looks like the jump is to its exact same location, except that if we go in game and actually just test this animation out, you're going to see that the jump is not only to the location that it's currently in. The jump actually has a little bit of natural movement to the animation itself. And what this is trying to do, this course correct, is effectively trying to make it such that the creation actually stays in the place where it actually started the slam. And this is something that is passed here on Legion Slam Spin. We send the signal to change, and when we look at the signal for it to change, this is something that gets passed here on Legion Slam Spin. When it sends the signal, the creation itself receives the signal and actually updates the location of the slam, such that when the slam actually begins, we have the location of the slam and it actually does the slam where we want it to happen. And then we release the attack. The attack is that attack that we were looking at before, the slam attack with the spherical hitbox at the specific location, and that's this animation. Now, one of the complications that I ran into, which is something that, at least to my knowledge, every single custom creation runs into, is the fact that, for example, here we wanted to do the dash and then the slam. The unfortunate situation that happens when we do this is that as soon as the creation begins its attack, unfortunately, whenever we alter the position of the slam, we're going to see here that when the creation receives the signal that changes the follow target to slam, it at the very end actually updates the slam location to current location for positional readjustment. So it grabs the variable slam location and actually sets it to its current location. Now, the unfortunate thing that happens is that during an animation, this is something that multiple creators have experienced before. For some reason, the creation does not actually update its location throughout the animation. So as it is doing this slam right here, even though we call this Legion Slam Spin, which we have it to send the signal, the follow device slam, we go to the Legion follow device handler, we have the slam, and we are updating the location here. But instead of returning to the location that it is at after it finishes the ram, which it's going to go forwards because the ram also is one of the animations that has inherent movements to it. Once it finishes actually going forward, it will not actually return to the location where it begins the slam right here. It will instead course correct to this location right here where it actually started the ramming instead. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but that is the current behavior that we have with the custom creations when it comes to their animations. When it comes to like locational information, they will have the information that they had before they began the animation, and even if you update it during the animation, the location will not actually update until the creature is done with the animation. Here we have a different ram and slam course correct because upon reaching this conclusion that the creation would not update its location correctly to where I wanted it to go, I instead changed this attack to where it would now target the player. So I created a new ram and slam course correct, and I've set it to be effectively targeting the target itself. So instead of doing the directed movement towards the place where it's supposed to slam, it will actually attempt to target the player. And because of this, I also have a new node here called region ram and slam warning VFX. This VFX is supposed to trigger this signal. The signal is very simple. All it does is it mounts the targeting VFX on the current target, and this VFX is cleared later on by the signal. It's not a very important signal. All you have to know is that it makes the targeting appear and then the targeting disappears later on. This is just to signal to the player that it is currently being targeted, and that instead of the launcher trying to slam down where it was, it will try to slam down the player that it just targeted. And that's how it does the ram and slam. This is something to keep in mind, this fact that the creations do not update their location data while they're in the middle of an animation. But that's how it currently works, and that's one way to work around it, is by making it such that your attacks, if you're chaining multiple animations together, that they don't actually depend on you having the correct data for the location. As for the teleport is also very simple. The teleport actually uses a very fitting node here. It simply uses complex creation teleport. This does exactly what it says it does. It just teleports the creation to this location and this rotation. And there's a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to teleportation. Teleportation is always difficult when it comes to creations and players alike. The other thing that we have here are a couple of attachment points. These are the custom attachment points that I've created for this creation, and these are very simple. These are just backwards and forwards. They're just -6 or +6, either backwards or forwards. What these do is very simple, but it can be a little bit misleading. So after the creation teleports, I wanted to signal to the players that it actually teleported. So I played the time effect of it reappearing, which is the same animation as the projectile of the attachment point here. Even though the attachment point is backwards, the way that it works out is it will play an animation on the backwards attachment point, which is actually the new location for the creation. So it actually plays this animation on the creation itself, and then on the forwards location it will play out this, which is the teleport VFX. And what this ends up happening is this plays where the creation actually was, because each of these points are the exact amount apart from each other. One is 6 forwards and the other is 6 backwards. So when it plays it on forwards, it will actually be playing it where it was, and when it plays it on backwards, it will actually play where it actually is. It's a little bit confusing, but that's how it works. Now, one thing to keep in mind with teleportation is that ideally you should have some sort of check here. You should have some sort of condition to where it can actually teleport. So for example, we could check the target attachment point location and check whether backwards is currently touching like a wall or like a solid structure or something of the sort. And then if it is, we could have it such that, say we do like whether it is currently occupied or not. If it is, we wouldn't teleport, we would just do nothing, or maybe teleport towards forwards instead. And if it isn't, then we can actually teleport. Ideally, we would have a check such as this, but that will depend on the setup of the game itself. But you should absolutely keep in mind that you should have a check, because what can happen here is the creation can teleport itself inside a wall, and if it goes inside a wall, it might not be able to come back from that wall depending on how it works, or it might teleport itself out of bounds, which that one would be really bad. Although if it goes out of bounds, it would eventually leave the territory, it would eventually fall to the ground enough to where it would actually teleport itself back, as seen here on the roaming and return to spawn point. After it goes beyond 50 meters, it will actually force the teleport, so it would eventually return to the spawn point. Now ideally none of this would happen, and ideally you would have effective checks as to whether your creation is trying to teleport somewhere that it shouldn't, so that this never has to happen. But it's something to keep in mind. Hello, post-recording me here. I realized I completely forgot to go over the second branch of the execute only by sequence in the Legion custom combat node. So here you can see it starts the exact same as the first branch. It will first ask about the distance from self to the target. If that distance is greater than 8, it's going to try to trigger the ground pursuit. This is going to have a minimum trigger and a maximum trigger distance. It'll also have the distance to where the creation will understand that it reached the end of the pursuit, so it will stop. We can set the speed of the pursuit as well, if it's going to run to the enemy or just walk. There's the inner ring radius, the pursuit when it is within the inner ring. We can also set the duration that the pursuit's going to take. And it also has, it's one of the tactics that has a cooldown attached to it, so you can also attach a cooldown here straight into the tactic itself. It also has the contacts, whether it can be interrupted. And then if the distance is not greater than 8, then we're going to execute this other tactic right here, which is the ground confrontation. And what this does is exactly what it says. The creation will start going to a confrontation with its current target. We have a similar setup here where we have an inner radius and an outer radius of this confrontation, the interval between each direction change, the minimum rest interval, which is effectively the minimum amount of time that it can spend resting in a single location, waiting until it moves again to another confrontation location. There's a maximum, whether the path fighting is always achievable, whether it's restricted by the territory. And then we have some weights here, because effectively what this ground confrontation is it triggers random movements on the entity based on these weights here. So forward, backwards, leftwards, and rightwards. There's also the avoidance here. So it's effectively to give the idea that the creation is standing off, confronting the opponent that it's facing. Can observe this behavior in regular Genshin creations as well. And this is what this tactic allows us to do. So in the end, how this takes effect is whenever the creation is not casting his skills, whenever it is constrained by the global cooldown, that's when it's going to actually go to this sequence, because this sequence here, the first sequence, always ends on a skill. So it will always fail every single one of these whenever the creation is in the global cooldown, unless it triggered the teleport, in which case it will wait for 1 second because of cooldown disengage, and then it will actually perform a skill. But after that, whenever it is on the global cooldown, it's waiting for its skills to come off that global cooldown. Then it will go into this tactic right here, or the ground pursuit, if the opponent's distance is greater than 8. So now that we've explained how everything works, let's just quickly recap how this creation ends up looking like this and not like this. So we have the custom complex creation here. This custom creation is invisible because it is supposed to look like this. This ball has a follow motion device, it has sounds, it has animations that it plays, but it doesn't actually do anything other than follow the custom creation. The custom creation itself has the skills that we've set up that it can do depending on the current situation, whether it's combat or whether it is not on combat. And then it does those skills. It has the autonomous logic parameter settings that you can set up the way that you want as to where it's going to see the enemy, where it's not going to see the enemy, the territory, all those things. It can have a patrol setting as well that you can set up as it does its skills via those conditions that we have set up here on combat. It will send signals to the server node graph to where it will change the spinning notion of the ball. So it will change depending on the signal, and then it will switch back here with the timer. And as it does all these things, it will keep track of its aggro, it will keep track of its multi-hits. It will apply unit statuses to prevent the player from getting completely destroyed by multi-hits. This is something that works for either the creations or the player themselves. And then once this creation is destroyed, the stage entity will detect which creature was destroyed, and if it is our custom creation, it will actually play out the death animation. The ball will inherit all of the variables that we have set up for all the entities that have to be destroyed. We're going to stop all the sounds, and then after we do all that, the ball itself will simply wait for the timer to trigger. When the timer is triggered, which is the timer of the death animation, it will just remove all the other entities and then itself, and that will be the end of our custom creation. Yeah, as you can see, using this trick of making the creation invisible, while we do lose a little bit of access to the VFX on the timeline itself, it's still very powerful to use this trick because it allows you to do things such as this. Create a ball that is not actually a ball, as a Lawatro that is attacking you. You could do much crazier things, such as you could literally create battle tanks that act as long as you find a creature that can actually act like a tank. We have all these options here. We have all the slimes now. We have all the hilichurls, the abyss order, the fatui, automatons, the humans. You could create an android. You could create whatever it is that you wanted, make it invisible, and then use the skills of this custom creation themselves to actually animate and effectively rig your creation to make it look like you're fighting something that you're absolutely not, but you're almost certain that you are. And that was the intent behind this custom creation. It was created for the contest, the spooky asset contest. I actually forgot the name of the contest. Is it spooky tent? Something like that. In any case, that's all from me today. Now you know how to make extremely crazy looking custom creations and how to make them animate exactly how you want them to. And now I would like to know, what types of creations would you use this trick for? What types of creations would you make for your own Wonderlands? I would really like to know. I will also take this opportunity to tell you all to go check out the Creator Front Discord server. It's the official server for all of us Miliastra creators. There we have a new feature now to where you can post all of your questions in a forum-like location in the Discord, and people will be able to simply go to that forum or to that thread, and they will be able to simply reply to your questions. And also there are other chats that a lot of mentors, which are people who are always there to answer to your questions whenever you have any questions about how things work, things like that. They will always be there to reply to those questions. There's a lot of very talented creators there that are ready to help you. They are also ready to help you playtest. If you really need to playtest something, some feature, there you will be able to find a lot of people to test. You also get to take part in all of these events, such as this event for the spooky tent or the spooky assets that we're currently having. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see your creations soon in the Miliastra lobbies, and I really appreciate you watching this video. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.